Okay, so we've got some um, really interesting material for this deep dive today. It feels almost like listening in on a really personal coaching session, doesn't it?
It really does. It's about that conversation we have inside our own heads and how it, impacts everything, especially learning and growth.
And what's striking is how it starts. Right off the bat, it speaks directly to you, the listener. It acknowledges your effort.
Yeah, that line, I'm proud of you because you care. It's quite arresting, isn't it? Makes you stop and think.
Totally. Why start there? Why not just jump straight into the how-to tips and strategies?
Well, I think the source is suggesting that the caring, the effort itself, that's the real starting point. It's the foundation, acknowledging that courage it takes just to show up and try.
Yeah, because learning is vulnerable. Putting yourself out there, trying something new, it takes guts.
It absolutely does. So recognizing that care, that initial investment of energy, it sets a different tone. It honors the listener's commitment before anything else.
And then it connects that caring directly to, well, being willing to be uncomfortable, which is something we often try to avoid, right?
We definitely do. But the source frames it as the place where growth happens, actively choosing again and again to step into that feeling of unease, of not quite knowing what you're doing.
That stretch zone. That's where the real learning takes hold, apparently, not in the comfort zone.
So you've got this base. You care, you're brave enough to try, you're willing to be uncomfortable. That's huge.
But then, then the focus shifts. It shifts inward to our own beliefs. And this is where things can get tricky.
Yeah, because all that effort and courage can be, well, amplified or completely sabotaged depending on what's going on inside your head.
That analogy they used was so spot on, trying to drive with the emergency brake on.
Exactly. You're hitting the gas, you're putting in the effort, but something internal is holding you back, grinding against your progress, that critical inner voice.
And the examples of that voice, they felt very familiar.
Oh, absolutely. Things like, I'm just not good enough for this. Or specifically for language learning, I'll never actually be fluent.
Or maybe I'm too old to start, or I learned so much slower than everyone else. You hear those?
Yeah. Or I'm just not like them. Comparing yourself to people who seem to pick things up effortlessly, it's that comparison trap.
Seeing them laid out like that, you realize how common they are. And the source points out, it's not just about feeling bad in the moment. There's more going on.
Right. This is where the neuroscience bit comes in, which is fascinating. It's not just, feeling down. When you repeat these negative thoughts, you're actually physically strengthening the connections in your brain associated with that thought, like carving a pathway.
So the more you think, I'm not good enough, the easier it becomes for your brain to default to that thought, like a well-worn path in a forest.
Precisely. It's called synaptic plasticity. Your brain adapts based on your experiences, including your internal experiences, your thoughts. So repeated negative self-talk literally makes that negative thinking more automatic, more ingrained. It starts to feel like the objective truth.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just in your head in a vague way. It's physically shaping how your brain works. That makes challenging those thoughts even more critical.
It really does. It highlights that changing your thinking isn't just, wishful thinking. It's actual cognitive work. You're trying to build new pathways, basically.
Which leads directly to that big, pivotal question the source poses. It asks you, the listener.
What do you really believe about yourself deep down?
Yeah. And then, crucially, are those beliefs helping you grow, or are they the emergency brake holding you back?
That's a moment for some serious self-reflection, isn't it? Really examining those core assumptions we have about ourselves. What stories have we internalized?
And where do those stories even come from? The source makes a great point. They're often not based on, objective fact.
No, not at all. They might be echoes of something someone said years ago, or based on a few bad experiences, or just that relentless comparison to others we see online or around us. They're narratives.
Narratives we've maybe accepted without question. We've bought into them.
But the really hopeful message here, the powerful turn the source takes, is that these narratives aren't set in stone.
Stories can be rewritten.
Exactly. We have the capacity to change them. We can actively challenge those limiting beliefs and start building new, more empowering self-perceptions, new ways of seeing ourselves and what we're capable of.
That feels really empowering, especially if you felt stuck in a negative cycle for a long time. Like, change is actually possible.
It is possible, but, the source is realistic too. It's
Yeah.
not suggesting it's like flipping a switch. It takes conscious effort, consistent practice, questioning those automatic negative thoughts when they pop up.
It's work, like building any new skill.
Exactly. But the core message is one of agency. Change is always possible. We're not permanently defined by those old stories.
Okay, so if we accept that change is possible and we want to start rewriting those limiting narratives, how? Where do we actually begin?
Well, the source offers a very concrete, practical starting point, a tool they call belief tracking.
Belief tracking. Okay. Sounds methodical. How does it work?
It's actually quite straightforward in concept. The example they use is perfect. You make a mistake, maybe mispronounce a word, and that immediate thought hits. Ugh, so stupid.
Yep. Familiar territory for many of us.
So belief tracking involves a few steps. First, just catching that thought as it happens, becoming aware. There's that thought.
Okay, awareness first. Don't just let it wash over you.
Right. Then, crucially, you pause. You create a tiny bit of space between the event and your reaction. Instead of just accepting "I'm so stupid" as fact, you actively reframe it. You consciously rewrite that internal sentence into something more accurate, more helpful, and frankly, kinder.
So instead of "I'm so stupid," you might change it to
Something like, okay, whoops, that wasn't right. I'm learning here. Or making mistakes is part of this process. Or even just, okay, that's interesting. I thought it was pronounced differently.
shifting from a harsh judgment about yourself to an observation about the situation or the learning process.
Exactly. And the why behind doing this is so important. It's not just about trying to feel better superficially.
It goes back to the brain pathways.
It does. By deliberately changing the language you use inside your head, you're actually influencing how your brain perceives and processes that situation. You are actively shifting your internal script.
Yeah, from judgment to curiosity maybe, or just acceptance.
Yes, curiosity, acceptance, a growth focus. You're telling your brain, this isn't a catastrophe, this is information, this is learning. It changes the emotional charge of the experience.
Our internal language really does shape our reality, doesn't it? More than we probably realize.
Massively. We tend to think our thoughts are just reactions, but they actively construct our experience. By choosing different words that are constructive and growth-oriented, we start to shift our entire perspective.
It's like tuning your internal radio frequency, away from static and criticism towards something clearer and more supportive.
That's a great way to put it. You're creating a more supportive internal environment for yourself, which makes it easier to keep trying, to take risks, to learn.
And to really illustrate this, the source shares that personal story. It's quite moving.
It really is about feeling invisible, missing her own language, being immersed in English and struggling internally, even while maybe looking like she was doing okay on the outside.
That gap between the external appearance, the smile, the effort, and the internal battle, that feels incredibly real.
So real. It validates that struggle that so many learners experience but might not talk about. It normalizes it, makes you feel less alone if you've ever felt that way.
Absolutely. And the takeaway from her story wasn't, snap out of it. It was much gentler.
It was about persistence. Just keep going, keep showing up, taking those small, sometimes awkward steps. One sentence at a time, one slightly uncomfortable conversation at a time, even when self-doubt is screaming.
It emphasizes the power of those small, manageable actions, breaking down huge goals like fluency into something you can actually do today.
Right. What's one small thing I can do right now? It makes it less overwhelming and validates the effort involved in just trying. Each small step adds up.
And that flows really nicely into the next point about progress itself.
Yeah.
Because our expectation is often this smooth, straight line upwards, right?
Oh, totally. We want that linear graph showing constant improvement, but the reality of learning is usually messier.
Much messier. The source talks about bursts of progress, then hitting plateaus where it feels like nothing's happening.
And sometimes even feeling like you're going backwards, forgetting things you thought you knew. It can be really disheartening.
Definitely. And it's on those plateaus or during those apparent setbacks that the inner critic loves to jump back in.
See? I told you. You're stuck. You're not getting anywhere.
Exactly. Which is why the source really hammers home the importance of noticing and celebrating what it calls the tiny wins, the ones nobody else might even see.
I love that phrase, tiny wins that no one celebrates. What are some examples they mentioned?
Things like suddenly understanding a whole sentence someone says without having to mentally translate it word by word, that little click.
Or managing to reply to a question, maybe in a shop or something, feeling just a tiny bit more confident than last time.
Maybe using a new word or phrase you learned and having it understood, or even just understanding a joke in English for the first time.
Yes, those little moments, they might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of fluency, but they are tangible proof of progress. They're the bricks building the wall.
And the crucial part is acknowledging them, actually pausing to appreciate them. Because it's so easy to just brush past them and focus on what you can't do yet.
So easy. We're wired to notice the gaps, the imperfections. But consciously celebrating those small victories, even just internally saying, hey, nice one, that's fuel.
It provides evidence against the inner critic. It proves you're moving forward, even if it feels slow. It keeps motivation alive.
Absolutely. It reinforces that your effort is yielding results, which is essential for sticking with it long term.
And speaking of long-term, that leads to the idea of sustainability. You can't just grind constantly.
No, that's the fast track to burnout. The source really validates taking breaks, slowing down when you need to. It's not weakness, it's wisdom.
But it draws a really important line, doesn't it, between resting and quitting.
A critical distinction. Resting is recharging, allowing your brain and energy levels to recover so you can come back effectively. Quitting is abandoning the goal altogether.
So it's about self-compassion again, treating yourself like you'd treat a friend. You wouldn't tell a friend who's exhausted to just keep pushing relentlessly until they collapse.
Exactly. You'd encourage them to rest, take care of themselves. We need to extend that same courtesy inward. Resting is part of the process, not a deviation from it.
And right after making that point, the source offers this wave of direct validation, just pure encouragement aimed at you, the listener.
Yeah, those powerful statements. You're doing enough.
You are enough.
Your journey is valid.
And my favorite, your learning is improving every single day, even when it doesn't feel like it.
Why do you think those direct affirmations are so necessary? Why do we need to hear that?
Well, because that inner critic we've been talking about can be so loud, so persistent. These affirmations feel like providing the counter argument directly.
Like actively feeding yourself the positive messages to balance out the automatic negative ones.
Exactly. It's like building up your internal cheerleader to challenge the internal critic. It's about internalizing messages of self-acceptance, validating your own effort, regardless of the immediate visible outcome.
Building that supportive inner voice. Okay, so we have self-compassion, celebrating tiny wins, resting. And then the source introduces a final, really practical framework for managing that inner dialogue.
The 3 A's: awareness, acceptance, adjustment.
Right. Let's break those down a bit more. Awareness, that's the first A.
Which is basically what we talked about with belief tracking, just noticing the thought when it pops up.
Exactly. Developing that observer self. Stepping back just enough to see the thought as a thought, not necessarily as reality, like watching clouds drift by. You see them, but you aren't the cloud.
Okay, so you spot the unhelpful thought. I'll never get this grammar rule. Awareness. What's next?
The second A, acceptance. And this one can feel tricky.
Yeah, because it sounds like you're agreeing with a negative thought. Okay, I accept I'll never get this grammar rule. That doesn't sound helpful.
Right, but that's not what it means here. Acceptance in this context means acknowledging the thought's presence without fighting it or judging yourself for having it. Okay, so not agreeing with the content, just acknowledging, okay, that thought is here right now.
Precisely. The source suggests a helpful internal phrase like, that's interesting, or, there's that I'll never get it thought again.
It creates distance, like you're observing it neutrally instead of getting tangled up in it.
Exactly. Fighting the thought often gives it more energy. Acceptance, in this sense, is about letting it be there without resistance, like that cloud floating by. It reduces its power.
Okay, that makes sense. You see it, you acknowledge it's there without freaking out, and then...
Then comes the third A, adjustment. This is the active part. This is where you gently, consciously shift the thought.
This is the re-rating part from belief tracking.
Yes. You replace the unhelpful thought with something kinder, truer, and more constructive. The examples they gave were great.
Like changing, I'm bad at speaking to.
I struggle sometimes, but I know I'm improving. Or shifting, I don't know enough words, to I'm learning more vocabulary every day. Those adjustments feel subtle, but really powerful. It's acknowledging the difficulty, I struggle sometimes, but also acknowledging the effort and progress. I'm improving, I'm learning.
Exactly. It reframes the challenge as part of the learning curve, not as a final verdict on your ability. It acknowledges the effort, the forward movement.
So the 3 A's: notice it, awareness. Don't fight it, acceptance. Gently change it, adjustment. It feels like a practical loop you can practice.
It really is. And the source emphasizes that this isn't just an internal exercise with no external effect. This internal work awareness, acceptance, adjustment has ripple effects.
How so?
It builds resilience. It changes how you approach challenges, not just in learning, but in all areas of life. It builds a stronger, more compassionate inner foundation.
Because ultimately that internal conversation is kind of steering the ship, isn't it? It directs your experience.
Absolutely. And learning to intentionally guide that conversation, even gently, can make a huge difference in your confidence, your willingness to try new things, and your overall sense of well-being.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping up this first big chunk, the focus is really on that internal world, recognizing the power of our beliefs, tracking and adjusting our thoughts, being kind to ourselves, celebrating the small stuff.
And understanding that progress isn't linear, it's messy, but the key is consistency and self-compassion.
And it all comes back to that idea of systems, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Building reliable processes rather than just relying on willpower or chasing a distant goal.
Every single time, practices like belief tracking or the 3 A's, those are the systems. They're the daily habits that carry you forward, much more reliably than just hoping you'll feel motivated tomorrow.
It's about embracing the process, the journey, warts and all.
Exactly. And recognizing that, tuning that inner dialogue, applying these mental tools consistently, that's what builds momentum and resilience for the long haul. And a huge part of making those systems stick relates to something else the source dives into: identity.
Ah, yes, the connection between who we think we are and what we actually do. That really struck me.
Me too. It's not just about wanting something, it's about whether achieving it aligns with your fundamental sense of self.
Explain that a bit more. How does identity link to habits?
Well, the source describes it as a kind of feedback loop. Your habits reinforce your identity, and your identity shapes your habits. They influence each other constantly.
Okay.
Think about that example they used. You want to become fluent in Spanish. That's the goal. But deep down, maybe you carry this belief, this identity of, I'm just not good at languages.
Right, so there's a clash. The goal, fluency, conflicts with the perceived identity, not a language person.
Exactly. That internal conflict acts like a huge brake. Your own self-concept becomes a major barrier to actually putting in the consistent effort needed. You might start, but that underlying belief whispers, see, this is too hard for you. You're not cut out for this.
Making it much easier to give up when things get tough.
Precisely. But here's the powerful counter idea, the key insight the source offers.
Don't wait until you are the thing to start acting like the thing.
You got it. You don't wait until you feel fluent or confident or like a language person before you adopt the behaviors of that person.
So you sort of act your way into the identity, even in small ways.
That's the idea. You start embodying the identity you aspire to through small, consistent actions. And gradually, over time, those actions start to reshape your self-perception. The identity begins to feel more real, more authentic.
Okay, let's make that center practical for someone learning English. How would they apply this identity shift day to day?
Think about the language you use to describe yourself. Instead of constantly saying, I'm trying to learn English,
That word trying can imply doubt, can't it? Like, you're not sure you'll succeed.
it can. So the shift might be subtle, but powerful. Start describing yourself, even just internally, as I am an English speaker in progress, or I am someone who practices English daily.
It sounds like a small change, just wording.
It is subtle, but language matters, especially internal language. Framing yourself as someone doing the thing, rather than just trying to do it, can genuinely influence your motivation, your consistency, and your willingness to engage.
It connects to that analogy they used about breaking in new shoes.
Yes, I loved that one. New shoes can feel stiff, maybe a bit uncomfortable at first. They don't feel like your shoes yet.
Right.
But the more you wear them consistently, the more they soften, mold to your feet, and eventually they just feel natural. They become yours.
So consistently doing the actions of an English speaker, listening, reading, attempting to speak, even if it feels awkward initially, is like wearing those shoes.
Exactly. You're gradually breaking in that identity. You're making it feel more comfortable, more like you. Each little act of practice reinforces, yes, I am someone who engages with English.
So it prompts the question for you, the listener. How do you currently describe yourself in relation to English? Is it empowering or limiting?
And are you consciously noticing those moments when you do act like an English speaker, when you understand something, when you manage to communicate?
Are you acknowledging those moments as evidence?
Yeah.
See, I am doing this, reinforcing that identity shift.
Even a quick internal nod, yep, English speaker in progress right here. It helps solidify it.
Okay, so identity is the bedrock. Get that aligned or start acting your way into it. What's the next pillar for building effective systems?
Starting small, like ridiculously, comically small.
Comically small, yes. Why is that so important? Because our instinct is often the opposite, isn't it?
Totally. We get inspired, we get motivated, and we think, right, new leaf. I'm going to study English for 2 hours every single day starting Monday. Big ambitions.
And how often did that actually last?
Rarely. Life gets in the way, you miss one day, you feel guilty, the motivation plummets, and the whole grand plan collapses. We've all been there.
So the counterintuitive approach is tiny steps, almost insultingly small steps.
Exactly. The example from the source was reading in Spanish for just 1 minute before bed. 1 minute.
It sounds like nothing, like it couldn't possibly make a difference.
That's the point. The barrier to entry is practically zero. It's almost harder not to do it than to do it. There's virtually no resistance. Oh, I don't have time. It's 1 minute.
Okay, so it makes starting incredibly easy, but what's the knock-on effect?
Often, that 1 minute doesn't stay 1 minute.
Ah, right. Because the hardest part is just getting started, overcoming inertia.
Precisely. Once you've picked up the book, opened the app, whatever it is, you're already doing it. The initial friction is gone. So quite often, that 1 minute naturally stretches to 5 minutes, or 10, or maybe even longer. Momentum starts to build.
It's like the tiny snowball effect they mentioned.
Huh?
Starts small, but picks up speed and mass as it goes.
Exactly. Maybe not a huge avalanche right away, nothing flashy, but consistent rolling. And even if it is just 1 minute some days, that consistency itself builds confidence.
How so?
Because you're proving to yourself that you can stick to something. You're keeping a promise to yourself, however small. That builds self-trust, which fuels capability. You start to believe, okay, I can do this consistently.
So for someone learning English, on those days when motivation is low, when an hour feels impossible,
Just commit to one tiny thing. Read one paragraph. Listen to 30 seconds of a podcast. Review one flashcard. Say one sentence out loud. Make the task so small, so non-intimidating that it feels easy to achieve.
make the excuse harder than the action. I like that. That feels key to consistency.
It really is. Remove the friction to starting. Okay, so we have identity, starting comically small. How do we make starting even easier?
This is where cues come in, right? Those little environmental triggers.
Yes, the subtle nudges. Things in your environment or routine that automatically prompt an action, often without conscious thought, like the coffee example.
Right. Making coffee, the cue, automatically leads to reaching for your phone, the habit, an ingrained loop.
But the clever move wasn't just trying to stop reaching for the phone through sheer willpower. That's hard.
Instead, they change the environment slightly.
They put the Spanish notebook right where the phone usually was.
So the cue, making coffee, remained the same, but it now triggered a different response. Picking up the notebook, hijacking the habit loop.
Exactly. Using an existing pathway for a new purpose. So think about your own day. What are those automatic moments? Brushing your teeth, waiting for the kettle to boil, getting dressed.
And the idea is to link a tiny English action to one of those existing routines.
Precisely. That's habit stacking. While the kettle boils, review one flashcard. While brushing your teeth, listen to a 60-second English news update. While commuting, listen to an English podcast for 5 minutes.
You attach the new desired habit to one that's already firmly established. Makes it feel more automatic.
It leverages the power of existing routines. And they mention other simple cues too, like changing your phone lock screen.
Oh yeah, to an English prompt, like, what are 3 things you see right now in English?
So every time you instinctively glance at your phone dozens, maybe hundreds of times a day, you get this tiny nudge, a micro opportunity to engage. It's about making cues work for you, weaving them into the fabric of your daily life.
Which broadens out to the whole idea of the environment, not just specific cues. Our surroundings matter. A lot.
Hugely. Your environment can be your biggest ally or your biggest saboteur, silently helping you or constantly tempting you away from your goals.
That story about the English journal really drove this home. Bought with the best intentions.
But stuck in a drawer. Out of sight, out of mind. The intention was there, but the environment created friction. It required effort to even remember it, let alone use it.
But then just moving it. Putting it on the nightstand with a pen right next to it.
Suddenly it started getting used. Why?
Yeah.
Not because of a sudden surge of willpower. The environment changed, the cue was visible, accessible, the friction was lowered. Using it became the path of least resistance.
It makes you really look at your own space. Is your learning environment designed for success? Are your English books buried under papers, or are they easy to grab?
Is the language app hidden folders deep on your phone? Or is it right there on the home screen? Are your headphones always tangled in a drawer, or are they sitting right by your laptop or toothbrush?
Small tweaks, big impact. They mentioned other ideas too, like post-it notes with vocabulary on the bathroom mirror.
Yes. Or keeping an English news website or YouTube channel open in a browser tab, anything that makes engaging just a little bit easier, a little more inevitable. You're designing your environment to nudge you in the right direction.
Creating positive triggers all around you.
Yeah.
Okay, so align identity, start small, use cues, design your environment. What else keeps the engine running?
Seeing that you're actually making progress, which brings us to tracking.
Tracking. Okay, this one can feel a bit like homework, maybe. Or even negative if you miss a day.
It can definitely feel like that, like you're grading yourself, and seeing gaps can be discouraging, but the source reframes it. Think of tracking less as judgment and more as momentum building, making your effort visible.
Ah, like the calendar example. Just putting an X on the calendar for every day you do your tiny English habit.
Exactly. After a few days, you see a little chain forming. After a week or two, that chain gets longer. And psychologically, you really don't want to break the chain.
It becomes motivating in itself, a visual representation of your consistency.
Right. It taps into that desire for completion, that satisfaction of seeing progress accumulate, and it doesn't need to be complicated.
No spreadsheets required.
Definitely not. A sticky note with tally marks, a simple habit tracker app, a check mark in a notebook. The method isn't the point. The point is seeing the effort add up.
Because that visual proof fuels motivation, especially on days when you feel like you're stuck. The tracker reminds you, no, look, you've been showing up.
Exactly. It counters that feeling of, I'm getting nowhere. And for
Right.
English learners, the key is what you track.
Right. Don't track perfection. Don't track, did I understand everything?
No, track the effort, track the engagement, track the process.
Things like read for 10 minutes, listen for 15 minutes, practice speaking for 5 minutes, focus on the input, the time spent.
Yes. Focus on what you can control your actions, not the immediate outcome, which can fluctuate. Okay, next big topic. Willpower. The thing we always think we need more of.
Yeah, if only I had more willpower, I'd stick to my English study. But the source kind of busts that myth.
It does. The analogy they used was willpower as a phone battery.
Okay, finite, drains throughout the day.
Precisely. Every decision you make, big or small, what to wear, what to eat, how to respond to an email, resisting a distraction uses up a bit of that mental energy, that willpower battery.
Decision fatigue. That's why trying to force yourself to do something difficult, like complex study, at the end of a long day feels almost impossible sometimes. Your battery is low.
Exactly. So relying only on willpower, especially when your reserves are depleted, is setting yourself up for failure.
So the solution isn't necessarily get more willpower.
It's rely on willpower less. It's about setting things up, using systems so that you don't need heroic levels of willpower to get started.
Make it easier through preparation, like the podcasting example they gave.
Right. Their consistency wasn't just about forcing themselves to record. It was about preparing everything the night before, equipment setup, outline ready.
So when it was time to actually record, the friction was minimal. Less willpower needed because the decisions and setup were already done.
Exactly. So, applying that to English learning, prepare your materials ahead of time.
Lay out your notebook and pen. Choose the article you're going to read. Queue up the podcast episode. Decide which grammar point you'll review.
Yes, do that prep work when your energy is higher, maybe the night before or in the morning. Then, when your scheduled study time arrives, the path is clear. You just need to start walking. It drastically reduces that initial activation energy.
Preparation over perspiration, in a way. Set yourself up for an easy start.
That's the core idea. Okay, this next one feels related but distinct. Celebration. Actively acknowledging the wins.
Which we are often terrible at, right?
Yeah.
We finish something and immediately focus on the next thing, or what wasn't perfect about what we just did.
Totally. Or we downplay, oh, it was only 10 minutes of practice. But the source argues every acknowledged effort is like a deposit.
Into your self-belief bank account. I like that. Building evidence for yourself.
Exactly. Proof that you can do it, that you are making progress. And that accumulated self-belief makes you more resilient when things inevitably get tough later.
It builds that inner confidence.
Yeah.
And the example was slightly funny but pointed.
The nice one, Evan, after recording.
Yeah.
Sounds silly, maybe, but it was an intentional act.
Reinforcing the identity. I'm someone who does this consistently, not just I managed to do it this one time.
Right. So for you learning English, after you finish your practice, even if it was brief, take literally 2 seconds. Pause, maybe a small internal smile, and acknowledge it. Good job. I did that. Proud of that effort.
It sounds so simple, but connecting the action with that positive internal acknowledgement.
It wires them together in your brain. It reinforces the habit loop. It tells your brain, hey, doing this English thing feels good, making you slightly more likely to do it again tomorrow. It closes the loop positively.
Okay, identity. Tiny starts, cues, environment, tracking, managing willpower via systems, celebration. Is there a final piece holding all these systems together?
And there is, and it's about zooming out, connecting all this daily grind to something bigger, your why.
Your deeper reason, the purpose behind the practice.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be some grandiose, rigid life plan. It's more about having a sense of direction, a feeling that these small daily actions are contributing to something meaningful to you.
The source mentioned their why for learning English was connection, connecting with people globally.
Right. That underlying motivation is what pulls you through when the daily practice feels boring or difficult. Your why provides the meaning, the context for the effort.
Because let's be honest, systems and habits aren't always exciting. They can feel repetitive.
They absolutely can. That's where the why comes in. It answers the question, why am I bothering with this today? It transforms tedious effort into a meaningful step towards something you value.
So for you listening, it's worth spending some real time thinking about your deeper why for learning English. Go beyond the surface goal.
Yes, beyond pass the test or get the job. Why do you really want this? Connection with family, confidence traveling, accessing new ideas, personal growth, feeling more integrated.
Whatever it is, the source suggests writing it down. Keep it somewhere you can see it.
Let it be the fuel. When the system feels like a grind, reconnect with your why. Remind yourself what this effort is ultimately for.
Because reliable systems, consistently applied, are powerful. But systems linked to a strong personal why, that's where the real magic happens over time.
Beautifully put. And speaking of language itself, that vocabulary breakdown related to systems was a really practical bonus for English learners.
Oh yeah, highlighting those specific words that came up naturally in the discussion about habits and mindset.
Words like flip, meaning to change perspective quickly, insight, that moment of understanding, barely, meaning only just, and identity, which we talked a lot about.
Then words about momentum.
Yeah.
Momentum itself, an avalanche for when things really take off.
And about habits, consistency, doing it regularly versus being flashy or showy, terms for triggers, cues and triggers.
Words for reactions, instinctively, doing something automatically. And obstacles, saboteur, like that inner critic.
Concepts like willpower, focus words like obsess versus focusing on the outcome. And words about being deliberate, intentional, reliable, and reflect.
That's a great list. And actually learning and using those specific words.
Helps you sound more natural, more confident. It's another way to embody that English speaker identity. Using the language accurately to talk about the process of learning. It all weaves together.
Okay, so we've built this great picture of setting up effective systems. But life isn't always smooth sailing, right? What happens when motivation just disappears? Or you feel like you've hit a brick wall?
Ah, yes. The inevitable dips, the plateaus, the moments of frustration or boredom. That's the reality of any long-term endeavor, especially learning. It's not a failure, it's just part of the landscape.
So this next part of our deep dive is crucial. It's about navigating those challenges, building systems not just for the doing, but for the keeping going when it gets tough.
Exactly. We need strategies that are practical but also emotionally smart. How do we manage the internal side of things when the initial enthusiasm fades or when we feel stuck?
Where do the sources suggest we start with building that kind of resilience? It was something slightly unexpected.
Self-compassion, which might not sound like a system in the traditional sense, but the sources argue it's a fundamental one for navigating difficulty.
Okay, unpack that. How is self-compassion a system?
Well, think about the alternative. Self-criticism. When you make a mistake or feel you're failing, that harsh inner voice pipes up. You idiot, why can't you get this? You should be better by now.
Yeah, that familiar soundtrack.
The sources argue that this kind of internal attack actually triggers a threat response in your brain. It makes you feel defensive, unsafe, maybe even ashamed. And that state is terrible for learning. You shut down.
Fear constricts. It doesn't expand our ability to learn.
Exactly. Self-compassion offers a different path. It involves acknowledging the difficulty. Wow, this is really hard right now, and treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend in the same situation.
Recognizing it's okay to struggle, that learning is challenging. It's not a personal failing.
Right. And this shift from judgment to understanding activates different parts of the brain areas associated with care, connection, and safety. When you feel safer, you're more willing to try again, to take risks, to see the mistake as data rather than disaster.
So that internal shift changes the emotional context. The source gave an example, didn't it? Shifting, I'm so bad at this, to
Something like, okay, this is tricky and I'm still learning. That's all right. I'm making progress bit by bit.
it's a radically different internal message. One slams the door shut, the other keeps it open for the next attempt.
Precisely. So the system here is consciously practicing that compassionate self-talk when you stumble. It's a foundational system for building the resilience needed to keep going. It turns setbacks into learning opportunities instead of reasons to quit.
That ability to bounce back, to re-engage after a setback, that's resilience. And it seems like self-compassion is the bedrock of that.
It really is. Okay, so alongside managing the inner voice with kindness, the source has talked about something very practical for those moments of acute frustration. Reset rituals.
Reset rituals, little escape hatches.
Kind of. They're small, pre-planned, almost automatic actions you can take immediately after a frustrating learning experience or just when you feel overwhelmed and stuck. Little mental circuit breakers.
To stop that downward spiral of, ugh, this is impossible, I give up.
Exactly. The examples are really relatable. For someone learning Spanish, maybe it's putting on a favorite Spanish song you just enjoy, no analysis needed, pure pleasure.
Or watching a funny short YouTube clip in the language, something light and easy.
Or even just stepping away completely. A 5-minute walk outside, no phone, just breathing and noticing your surroundings. A brief disconnect.
The key thing is these aren't meant to be big, effortful things, right?
Absolutely not. They should be short, easy, accessible, and ideally enjoyable. They are not another chore to feel guilty about. The goal is simply to shift your mental state away from frustration and towards something more neutral or even positive.
So you have these little tools ready before the frustration hits.
That's the idea. Proactively plan them. Think now. What's a small thing that reliably helps you feel a bit better or calmer when you're stressed? Having that plan means you don't have to figure it out when you're already feeling overwhelmed.
It's like having an emotional first aid kit, as you said before. You hit the wall, you feel that frustration rising, you reach into your kit, pull out a reset ritual, take 5 minutes, interrupt the negative cycle, and then maybe you can come back to it with a slightly clearer head.
Exactly. It prevents the frustration from escalating and derailing you completely. Okay, so we have self-compassion for the inner voice, reset rituals for immediate frustration. What about keeping momentum over the longer term, especially when motivation wanes? Accountability came up.
Yes, but with a specific flavor, not the harsh kind.
Right. The sources framed accountability primarily as support and encouragement, not as judgment or punishment.
Because accountability can sometimes sound like someone breathing down your neck, checking your progress, criticizing you if you slip up.
Which can be motivating for some, maybe, but often counterproductive. The focus here was more on creating a supportive ecosystem, maybe a small group, online or offline, where people simply share their efforts and cheer each other on.
Like, hey everyone, managed my 15 minutes of listening today, and others respond with, great job, or way to go.
Exactly. No judgment if someone misses a day, just positive reinforcement for showing up. It taps into that need for connection, the feeling of being seen and acknowledged in your efforts.
It combats the isolation that can come with self-study. Knowing others are on a similar path, facing similar struggles, celebrating small wins together, that can be a powerful motivator.
Hugely. And they also had a neat idea for solo learners. Accountability to yourself.
Oh, right, like leaving yourself daily voice notes. Okay, today I practiced pronunciation for 10 minutes and reviewed vocabulary.
Or keeping a simple progress log. Even without external eyes, you're creating a record, a system for acknowledging your own effort and reflecting on it. Plus, as they pointed out, if it's voice notes in your target language, bonus speaking practice.
True. Killing two birds with one stone. It makes you think, what kind of accountability, gentle and supportive, would actually help you stay on track? Is it a group, a buddy, a personal log?
Definitely worth considering what fits your personality. Okay, moving on to another crucial element for long-term sustainability, rest.
Which feels almost radical in our productivity-obsessed culture.
Rest
Seems like stopping, like not doing the work.
Right. But the sources argue passionately that rest is not the opposite of work. It's an essential part of effective work, especially learning. It's an active, productive strategy.
Productive? How is not studying productive?
Because of what happens in your brain during rest, particularly sleep, that's when a huge amount of memory consolidation occurs. The things you learned get processed, sorted, and stored more effectively. Connections are strengthened.
So the learning doesn't just happen when you're actively studying, it continues while you sleep.
A significant chunk of it does. Skimping on sleep or never taking breaks can actually undermine the hard work you put in while studying. Your brain doesn't get the chance to properly integrate the new information. They also mentioned benefits like faster learning overall and even increased creativity.
Wow. So that extra hour of late-night cramming might actually be less effective than getting that hour of sleep.
That's the strong implication. Sleep is when the mental filing and organizing happens. So, building adequate rest into your system, planning for it, protecting it, whether it's sufficient nightly sleep or planned days off, isn't a luxury. It's a necessity for optimal learning.
It really reframes rest as a core part of the learning strategy itself, not just something you do when you collapse from exhaustion. That requires a conscious shift in priorities for many of us.
Absolutely. Okay, one final piece in this emotional resilience toolkit that the source has highlighted, gratitude.
Gratitude, again, maybe sounds a bit fluffy. How does it fit into practical learning strategies?
The source presents it as a very practical tool for perspective and motivation. It's about consciously, deliberately shifting your focus.
Shifting focus from what to what?
From what you haven't achieved yet, from the gaps in your knowledge, from the mistakes you made, to what you have accomplished, the effort you have put in, the progress you have made, however small. Appreciating the journey itself.
So it's an antidote to that constant feeling of not there yet.
Exactly. It grounds you in the present and acknowledges the steps already taken. The practice suggested was simple. At the end of the day, maybe jot down one thing you're proud of related to your learning and one thing you're grateful for.
Like, I'm proud I practiced speaking even though I was nervous, or I'm grateful I understood that podcast segment. Acknowledging effort and success.
Yes. This simple act helps rewire your focus away from deficits and towards accomplishments. It builds that sense of, I am making progress, which, as we know, fuels motivation. It can also foster a sense of joy in the process itself.
And if you can find joy in the learning journey, not just endure it until the destination, that makes everything more sustainable and, well, enjoyable.
Absolutely. Okay, let's quickly recap this toolkit for navigating the tough spots.
Right. We had self-compassion, being kind to yourself when you struggle.
Reset rituals, pre-planned actions to recover from frustration.
Accountability framed as support and encouragement.
Prioritizing rest, especially sleep, as an active part of learning.
And gratitude, consciously focusing on progress and appreciating the journey.
It's a really solid set of strategies for the emotional side of learning, and the advice was clear. Don't try to do all of this at once.
No. Pick one or two that resonate most right now. Start small. Be patient. Building these emotional habits takes time, just like learning the skill itself.
Exactly. It's all about being a bit more strategic and a lot kinder to ourselves as we navigate the inevitable ups and downs. And this whole discussion just underscores how much of learning is an internal game.
It really does. So let's really crystallize the key insights on mindset and self-belief that came out of that core conversation in the source material. What really stood out?
For me, it was the upfront acknowledgement of discomfort, the idea that feeling awkward, vulnerable, even a bit scared when learning something new, that's not just normal, it's often a sign you're actually stretching yourself.
Yes, they gave permission to feel uncomfortable. We often think feeling awkward means we're doing it wrong, but they reframed it as, no, that feeling means you're likely in the growth zone.
Exactly. Don't run from the awkwardness. Recognize it as a signal of progress. It takes courage to stay there.
And connected to that was tackling self-doubt head-on, those pervasive feelings of, I'm not good enough.
And that wonderfully simple yet profound statement, you are not broken, you're just human.
That lands powerfully, doesn't it? It instantly reframes those feelings. It's not a personal flaw. It's part of the universal human experience of learning and striving. Takes the pressure off.
It really does. It allows for that self-compassion we just talked about. Okay, so if self-doubt is normal, how do we work with it? Belief tracking came up again.
Right, that practical technique. Can we walk through the steps one more time, how they described it?
Sure. Step 1, awareness. Catch the negative thought in the act. I'm so stupid for making that mistake.
Stop.
Just notice it.
Don't just let it fly by uncommented. See it.
Step 2, observe it without immediate acceptance. Create that little space. See the thought as a thought, not necessarily a fact.
And then step 3, deliberately rewrite it. Consciously choose a different, more helpful internal response.
Replace I'm so stupid with, okay, learning moment, or mistakes happen, that's how I improve, active reframing.
And the point was made again, This isn't just superficial positive thinking. It's deeper.
Right. It goes back to changing the brain, carving those new neural pathways. The more you practice catching and rewriting, the easier, the more helpful thought becomes over time. It's cognitive restructuring, real work.
And that personal story about feeling invisible in a new country, despite trying hard,
Hmm.
it just validates this internal struggle so well.
It really does. It reminds us that what we see on the outside doesn't always reflect the internal reality. Many confident-seeming people have battled, or still battle, significant self-doubt. You're not alone in that feeling.
And her emphasis on progress being incremental, one sentence, one awkward conversation, reinforces the power of small, consistent actions. Don't wait for giant leaps.
Just keep taking the small steps, which ties into the messy nature of progress. It's not that smooth upward curve.
No, it's bursts, plateaus, setbacks. And it's easy to get discouraged in the plateaus.
Which is precisely why noticing and celebrating the tiny wins is so vital. Understanding a bit more today than yesterday, replying slightly more quickly, using a new phrase, those are real progress markers.
Shift the focus from the distant, overwhelming goal to the small achievements of today and this week. Recognize the journey.
And allow for rest. That crucial idea of resting without quitting. Taking breaks is not failure, it's strategy. It prevents burnout and makes the whole thing sustainable. Self-compassion in action.
And hearing those direct encouragements woven in, you're doing enough. You are enough. Your journey is valid. Your English is improving.
They act like direct counter-programming to the inner critic. Little infusions of support.
And the simplest tool of all, the deep breath.
Yes. The instant reset button. When thoughts are spiraling, just pause. Take one conscious breath. Inhale, exhale. It brings you back to the present moment. Interrupts the negative loop. So simple, so effective.
Okay, and the 3A's framework, awareness, acceptance, adjustment, really pulls this all together as a practical system.
It does. Notice the thought, acknowledge it without fighting, gently shift it. A repeatable process for training more constructive self-talk.
And the crucial link, this internal work changes external reality.
Absolutely. How you talk to yourself impacts your confidence, the risks you're willing to take, how you show up in the world. It shapes what you believe is possible.
Which connects to that beautiful idea that learning isn't just about the skill itself.
It's about becoming a more confident, more compassionate, more resilient version of yourself along the way. The language, or whatever you're learning, is the vehicle for that deeper transformation.
That elevates the whole endeavor. It's not just grammar rules, it's personal growth.
Exactly. And finally, that constant refrain, systems over goals.
Focus on the process, not just the outcome.
Right. Build reliable, positive daily habits like practicing the 3A's, celebrating small wins, preparing your environment. Trust that consistent engagement with good systems will lead to progress over time, even when motivation waxes and wanes.
It takes the pressure off needing to feel inspired every single day. Just follow the system.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Cultivating those sustainable habits and that resilient, compassionate mindset, that's the foundation for continuous improvement, not just in English, but really in any area of life you want to grow in.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. It really feels like a comprehensive look at the inner game of learning.
It really does. From acknowledging effort and courage to tackling negative beliefs, building practical systems, navigating challenges, and fostering self-compassion, it's all interconnected.
So maybe we can try and summarize some of the absolute core takeaways from unpacking this conversation.
Right.
What should you, the listener, really hold on to?
I think first, recognizing this is a personal journey. Your path won't look like anyone else's, and that's okay. Comparison is rarely helpful.
Absolutely. And valuing the effort and courage itself. Just showing up, trying, being willing to be uncomfortable that deserves acknowledgement. Quiet effort counts.
And accepting that setbacks and plateaus are totally normal. They aren't signs of failure. The key is how you respond to them. Coming back makes you stronger.
Redefining fluency, maybe. Not just as perfect grammar or accent, but as connection, courage, willingness to communicate even imperfectly.
I love that. And seeing learning not just as acquiring a skill, but potentially as a healing process, a way to challenge old limiting beliefs and discover your inherent worth and capability.
Which leads to that overarching invitation. Be kinder to yourself. Be more patient. Recognize the value in every single step, no matter how small it seems.
And realizing these ideas aren't just about language learning, are they?
Not at all. These principles apply to learning any new skill, tackling any challenge, any area of personal growth where self-doubt tends to creep in. The mental game is crucial everywhere.
So the real invitation isn't just to know this stuff intellectually.
No, it's to try it, to experiment. Pick one thing, maybe belief tracking, maybe starting comically small, maybe practicing the 3 A's, and actively apply it in your own life this week. See what happens.
Exactly. Move from passive listening to active application. That's where the transformation happens.
Okay, so as a final thought experiment for you, the listener, to take away and mull over.
Identify just one specific negative belief you tend to carry about yourself. Maybe related to English, maybe something else. Just one.
Got it. Okay. Now, gently consider how you could apply those 3 A's, awareness, acceptance, adjustment, to that specific belief. What might the adjustment part sound like? What kinder, truer thought could you begin to practice replacing it with?
Don't worry about perfecting it. Just plant that seed. That small intentional shift, practiced consistently. That's how change begins.
A really powerful note to end on. Okay, well, that brings us to the close of this deep dive.
It's been fascinating digging into this. We really hope you found it valuable. And remember those core messages. Notice your wins, be kind to yourself, trust your process, and just keep showing up.